When Dr. Richard Morrison called Whitney Houston's eight-octave range physically impossible on national television, he expected agreement from the scientific community. What he got was a phone call from Whitney herself, offering to prove him wrong, live on The Tonight Show for 2 straight hours. 28 million viewers were about to witness the most intense vocal demonstration in television history. March 15, 1992. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Studio One, NBC Burbank. The familiar blue and gold set gleamed under studio lights as America's favorite late-night host prepared for what would become one of the most controversial interviews of his career. Dr. Richard Morrison, professor of vocal science at Juilliard School and author of The Limits of Human Voice, sat in the green room reviewing his notes. At 57, Dr. Morrison had built his reputation on scientific precision and academic honesty. Tonight, he was here to address what he considered the most dangerous myth in popular music: Whitney Houston's claimed eight-octave range. "Dr. Morrison, you're on in 2 minutes," the assistant called. Dr. Morrison straightened his navy tie and walked toward the studio with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about vocal science in 30 years of research. At 11:32 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Dr. Morrison found himself sitting across from America's most trusted television host. "Our next guest is here to talk about something that might surprise you," Johnny announced to the studio audience and 28 million viewers. "Dr. Richard Morrison from Juilliard says that some of our favorite singers might not be everything they claim to be." The audience applauded politely. Dr. Morrison settled into the guest chair with academic composure. "Johnny, thank you for having me. I want to start by saying I have tremendous respect for Whitney Houston as an artist. She has a beautiful voice, extraordinary talent, and has brought joy to millions of people." Johnny leaned forward, sensing the "but" coming. "But," Dr. Morrison continued, adjusting his glasses with authority, "the claim that she possesses an eight-octave range is not just exaggerated, it's physiologically impossible." A murmur rippled through the studio audience. This was 1992, when Whitney was at her absolute peak, when "I Will Always Love You" was dominating every radio station in America. Johnny raised an eyebrow. "Now, doctor, that's a pretty strong statement. We've all heard Whitney sing. That voice seems pretty unlimited to me." Dr. Morrison pulled out a manila folder filled with charts and graphs. "Johnny, I've spent 6 months analyzing Whitney's recordings with state-of-the-art equipment. Yes, she hits impressive high notes. Yes, she can go quite low. But 8 full octaves? The human larynx simply cannot produce that range safely." He opened his folder, revealing scientific diagrams. "The vocal cords are delicate tissue, Johnny. They have physical limitations. To claim 8 octaves means claiming a range from approximately 65 hertz to 16,744 hertz. Most trained opera singers work within 5 octaves. 6 is exceptional. 7 is nearly impossible. 8 is fantasy." The audience was getting restless. Johnny could feel their mood shifting. "So what are you saying, doctor? That Whitney is lying about her range?" "Not lying, Johnny, but perhaps misguided by marketing departments, studio enhancement, strategic key changes, clever editing, overdubbing different vocal takes. There are dozens of ways to create the illusion of superhuman range." Dr. Morrison's confidence was growing. "I've analyzed every major Whitney Houston recording released between 1985 and 1992. While impressive within normal human parameters, nothing I've heard scientifically supports an 8-octave range. The physics simply don't work." Johnny sensed controversy brewing. "But doctor, what about live performances? We've seen Whitney perform live many times." "Johnny, live performance venues use sophisticated sound systems, backing vocals, and acoustic engineering that can create impressive illusions. But 8 octaves sustained over time, without permanent vocal damage? Impossible." Dr. Morrison leaned forward, his tone growing more definitive. "I'm not trying to diminish Whitney's talent, but as a vocal scientist, I have a responsibility to separate marketing claims from physiological reality. The 8-octave claim is dangerous because it sets impossible standards for young singers." The studio fell quieter. Dr. Morrison was making sense from a scientific perspective, but he was challenging America's vocal sweetheart. "So you're saying that Whitney Houston's voice, while beautiful is basically normal human range enhanced by technology and marketing? Exactly, Johnny. Beautiful voice, yes. Exceptional within human limitations, certainly. But superhuman range that defies anatomy? Absolutely not. The science doesn't support it, and if she actually attempted to use 8 octaves regularly, she'd destroy her voice within months. What Dr. Morrison didn't know was that Whitney Houston was backstage at that very moment. She'd arrived at NBC Studios that afternoon for a completely different reason, meeting with network executives about a potential Christmas special. The meeting had gone well, lasting longer than expected, and by the time Whitney finished, it was nearly 11 p.m. "Want me to call your driver?" her assistant Karen asked. "In a minute," Whitney said, stopping as they passed a monitor showing The Tonight Show. "Who's this talking about vocal science?" Karen checked her notes. "Dr. Richard Morrison from Juilliard. He's discussing limitations of human voice." Whitney paused, watching the monitor as Dr. Morrison explained why her claimed range was physiologically impossible. "Turn this up," Whitney said quietly. They stood in the NBC hallway, watching Dr. Morrison systematically dismantle everything Whitney had worked 30 years to develop. Every scale she'd practiced as a child, every breathing exercise, every hour spent in church learning to channel emotion through her voice. "The 8-octave claim is marketing fiction," Dr. Morrison was saying. "Beautiful voice, yes. Superhuman range that defies anatomy? Absolutely not." Karen watched Whitney's face change. Not anger, exactly. Something deeper that had been building since childhood every time adults told her what wasn't possible. "Karen," Whitney said, her voice calm but carrying an edge, "get me 5 minutes with Johnny Carson. Right now." "Whitney, you're not scheduled to appear tonight. We need to. 5 minutes. Tell them Whitney Houston has something to say about Dr. Morrison's comments." Karen had worked with Whitney long enough to recognize that tone. This wasn't a request. "I'll talk to his producer," Karen said, already moving toward the studio. March 15th, 1992, 11:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Johnny Carson was wrapping up his conversation with Dr. Morrison when his producer's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Johnny, we've got a situation. Whitney Houston is here in the building. She heard Dr. Morrison's comments and wants to respond. Live. Right now." Johnny had hosted The Tonight Show for 30 years, but he'd never had a guest spontaneously appear to challenge another guest's scientific claims about their own abilities. His eyes lit up with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny announced, his voice carrying familiar professionalism and mischief, "we have an unexpected development. Whitney Houston is here at NBC tonight, and she's asked to respond to Dr. Morrison's comments." The audience exploded. 300 people began cheering and craning their necks toward the backstage entrance. Dr. Morrison's confident smile faltered as he realized his academic discussion was about to become very personal. "She wants to come on now?" Dr. Morrison asked, his voice betraying the first hint of nervousness. "That's what I'm told," Johnny grinned. "Whitney Houston, ladies and gentlemen." The Tonight Show band struck up an impromptu version of Greatest Love of All as Whitney walked onto the stage. She wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but not flashy, her hair pulled back to emphasize her face rather than create drama. No elaborate styling, no distracting accessories, just pure presence and confidence. The studio audience rose to their feet, applauding for nearly 30 seconds before Whitney gestured for them to settle down. She moved with the grace of someone who owned every stage she stepped onto. But there was something different tonight. This wasn't entertainment Whitney. This was the woman who had spent decades developing her gift and wasn't about to let anyone call it fake. "Dr. Morrison," Whitney said, settling into the guest chair next to him with perfect posture and unwavering eye contact. "I was backstage, and I heard your comments about my voice being physiologically impossible." Her tone was respectful but firm, warm but unmistakably serious. Dr. Morrison straightened in his chair, consulting his folder of charts. "Miss Houston, please understand, this is nothing personal. I have tremendous respect for your artistry. This is simply about scientific accuracy and—" "Doctor," Whitney interrupted gently, her voice carrying controlled power that made everyone fall silent. "What if I proved you wrong? Right here, right now, on live television?" The studio went completely silent. Johnny Carson leaned back with the expression of someone watching history unfold in real time. Dr. Morrison blinked several times. Miss Houston, I'm not sure you understand what you're suggesting. Sustained vocal performance at the range you claim would be extremely dangerous. Whitney smiled, the same smile she'd used as a child when adults told her she couldn't sing in church because she was too young, when teachers said her dreams were too big. 2 hours, doctor, she said, her voice clear and steady. 8 octaves, continuously demonstrated, no breaks, no studio tricks, no technological assistance. Just me, a microphone, and 28 million witnesses. The studio audience gasped. Johnny's mouth fell open slightly. Dr. Morrison's folder of scientific charts suddenly seemed very small. You can't. Ms. Houston, attempting such a demonstration could result in permanent vocal damage. The risk to your career. Doctor, Whitney leaned forward slightly, never breaking eye contact. You've spent 30 years studying what voices can't do. I've spent 30 years developing what mine can do. Which one of us do you think knows more about my capabilities? Dr. Morrison was sweating now, realizing he'd walked into something much bigger than an academic discussion. Whitney stood up from her chair gracefully. Friday night, March 20th, this same studio. 2 hours live television, every octave from my lowest chest voice to my highest whistle register. Sustained, continuous demonstration with medical monitoring. She extended her hand toward Dr. Morrison, who was still sitting, still clutching his folder. If my voice holds up, if I demonstrate every octave safely and powerfully for 2 full hours without a single break, you donate $50,000 to music education programs. The audience erupted in cheers. Johnny Carson grinned like a man watching the best television of his career. And if your voice fails? Dr. Morrison asked, finding his voice but not his confidence. Whitney's smile widened. Then I'll publicly admit you were right about everything. I'll acknowledge that my claimed range is marketing fiction, and I'll personally fund your vocal research program for the next 5 years. $500,000, Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison stared at her extended hand. Around him, 300 studio audience members held their breath. 28 million television viewers leaned toward their screens. Friday, March 20th, Whitney repeated, her hand still extended. 2 hours, 8 octaves, live on NBC. Medical professionals present. Scientific equipment monitoring every aspect. See you then, doctor. Dr. Morrison looked at her hand, then slowly stood up and shook it. The handshake lasted 6 seconds, sealing the most audacious vocal challenge in television history. The next 5 days changed everything. NBC immediately cleared Friday night programming. Music critics flew in from around the world. Vocal coaches and opera singers scrambled for tickets to witness what would either be the greatest vocal demonstration in history or the most public failure of a major artist's career. But the real preparation was happening in Whitney's home studio in East Orange, New Jersey. Mom, what if he's right? Whitney asked Sissy Houston during a practice session. What if 30 years of preparation isn't enough? Sissy Houston, gospel legend who taught Whitney everything about using voice as worship, smiled with wisdom. Baby, Sissy said, sitting at the piano, where she'd taught Whitney scales 20 years earlier. God gave you that voice for moments exactly like this. Not to show off, but to show what's possible when gift meets preparation meets faith. Whitney nodded, understanding this was bigger than proving Dr. Morrison wrong. This was about demonstrating that some achievements transcend scientific prediction when rooted in something deeper than technique. March 20th, 1992, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Tonight Show studio had been completely transformed. Medical equipment lined the walls, monitoring Whitney's heart rate and vocal cord vibrations in real time. Dr. Morrison sat with colleague experts from Johns Hopkins and Harvard Medical School. Johnny Carson introduced the challenge that had captivated America. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 nights ago, Dr. Richard Morrison claimed that Whitney Houston's 8-octave range was physically impossible. Tonight, in front of medical professionals and 28 million viewers, Whitney will attempt to demonstrate every octave continuously for 2 hours. Whitney walked onto the stage wearing all black, simple dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back. nothing to distract from what was about to happen. Dr. Morrison, she said, approaching the microphone, this performance is dedicated to every voice teacher who believes in their students, every singer who's been told their dreams are impossible, and every child who needs to know that limits exist to be transcended. She began with amazing grace in her lowest register. The first octave emerged like distant thunder, rich and dark and impossibly controlled. Dr. Morrison's face showed the first crack of uncertainty. The second octave flowed seamlessly, Whitney's middle range flowing with warmth and precision. Perfect pitch, flawless technique, zero visible strain. Octave 3 climbed higher, each note precisely placed, every breath supporting the next phrase. This was where most singers would begin to show effort, but Whitney looked comfortable as if humming in her kitchen. Hour 1 progressed through octaves 4 and 5. Whitney moved through classical pieces, gospel standards, and original improvisations that demonstrated not just range but musical intelligence. Her voice showed no fatigue, just increasing power and flexibility. Dr. Morrison leaned over to his Harvard colleague. This shouldn't be possible. The vocal cords should be showing stress indicators by now. Her heart rate is actually decreasing. Hour 90 minutes brought octaves 6 and 7. Whitney reached into her upper register with control that made trained opera singers weep openly. Notes so high they seemed to exist in a different dimension, yet grounded in perfect technique and breathing that never seemed to require effort. The studio fell into reverent silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing someone operate at the absolute peak of human vocal capability, but it was the final 30 minutes that changed everything. Whitney moved into her whistle register, that almost supernatural area where human voice transcends normal acoustic physics. Octave 8 demonstrated with sustained passages that proved she could live comfortably in frequencies most humans couldn't even hear clearly. This is impossible, Dr. Morrison whispered, but the studio microphones picked up his comment. Whitney heard him. Mid-performance, holding a note in the highest octave humans can produce, she opened her eyes and smiled directly at him while maintaining perfect pitch. When the 2 hours ended, Whitney concluded with a piece that began in her lowest register and climbed systematically through all 8 octaves, before ending with 30 seconds in the whistle register. The studio exploded with the kind of response usually reserved for religious experiences. But Dr. Morrison wasn't applauding. He was crying, his folders scattered on the floor, his understanding of vocal capability permanently altered. Whitney walked over to him, not even breathing heavily. Doctor, she said gently, what did you learn tonight? Dr. Morrison looked up, his face wet with tears, his academic certainty shattered. I learned that science explains what is, but doesn't always predict what's possible when someone transcends every assumption we make about normal human preparation. He pulled out his checkbook with shaking hands. $50,000 to music education programs. And Ms. Houston, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my gratitude for expanding my understanding. Whitney helped him to his feet. Doctor, doubt keeps us sharp. Challenge keeps us growing. Tonight happened because you pushed me to prove what I already knew I could do. The performance became instantly legendary, winning 3 Emmy Awards and a Grammy. Dr. Morrison became Whitney's biggest academic supporter, co-authoring papers on transcendent vocal achievement. That night proved that some human achievements transcend scientific prediction when grounded in decades of preparation and unshakable belief. Whitney demonstrated what happens when someone spends 30 years preparing for a moment that seems impossible, then delivers with such precision that impossibility becomes inevitable. So what about you? What limitation have you accepted without testing? What voice are you not developing because someone declared it impossible?